Have you ever had a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, where everything around you fell silent? Maybe it was early morning when the light was soft and the world hadn't quite woken up. Or maybe it was in the middle of a conversation when you realized you weren't really listening anymore, but feeling deeply from somewhere quieter than words could reach. There's a curious truth that many of us begin to uncover only after 60. It's this: life doesn't grow smaller as we age, it grows deeper. And yet, that's not the story most of the world tells us, is it? We're told that aging is a kind of slow disappearance, a fading into the background. We're taught to measure life by productivity, by busyness, by outward signs of success. And when those signs begin to fall away, when the career slows, the children grow, the plans shrink, some begin to wonder, have I stopped living fully? But what if that's the wrong question? What if full living was never about movement, but about meaning? Not about noise, but about noticing. Not about having more, but seeing more clearly what we already hold. Let me tell you a little story. There was once an old man who lived alone at the edge of a quiet forest. Every morning, he would brew his tea, step outside, and sit beneath the same gnarled oak tree. When asked why he did the same thing every day, he smiled and said, "Because the world is never the same twice, and neither am I." He wasn't chasing life, he was listening to it. And that is where our journey begins. In the next moments we share together, I invite you to slow down, not just your breath, not just your schedule, but your attention. Because living fully after 60 has nothing to do with rushing. It's about tuning into the subtleties, the glances, the pauses, the thoughts between thoughts. So take a breath, feel the ground beneath you. Let the weight of everything you thought you had to carry slip off, just for now. Let us begin this quiet reflection together, not to escape life, but to return to it with new eyes. Are you ready to discover what it truly means to live fully? Part 1. The loud voice inside. There's a voice in our heads that few of us speak about, yet nearly all of us hear. It doesn't announce itself with a name or a face. It doesn't knock before it enters. It simply speaks quietly, persistently, and often unkindly. You're not doing enough. You've made too many mistakes. You don't matter as much anymore. This is the voice of the inner critic, and for many people over 60, it becomes louder, not quieter, with age. When the noise of the world begins to fade, the office phones no longer ringing, the children no longer calling as often, the schedules loosening, the voice has more room to echo. In solitude, where there was once peace, we sometimes find judgment. And that judgment, curiously, doesn't come from others. It comes from within. But here's the deeper truth. That voice isn't you. It's not your soul speaking, nor your true self. It's a collection of fears, echoes of the past, and shadows of old expectations. A Buddhist monk once said, "We don't suffer because of the voice, we suffer because we believe it." That is a subtle but powerful shift. And perhaps for those of us entering the later seasons of life, this is the great spiritual task, to learn how to listen differently, to learn how to hear the critical voice without giving it the final word. I remember meeting a retired teacher in a quiet garden outside of Santa Fe. She was sitting beneath a low pine tree, feeding birds from the palm of her hand. She told me that when she first retired, the silence was unbearable. It felt like I had lost my purpose, my usefulness. I kept hearing myself think, "What are you even doing with your days?" But one day, she said, she started treating that voice like an old, bitter friend. She didn't try to silence it. She just stopped believing everything it said. Now, when that voice says, "You're wasting time," I smile and say, "I'm spending time." There's a difference. That story has stayed with me, because we all have those internal narratives that need rewriting. And the only pen we have to rewrite them is awareness. In Buddhist thought, the mind is often compared to a wild monkey, jumping from branch to branch, chattering endlessly, restless and agitated. But the practice of mindfulness teaches us not to chase the monkey, not to silence it, but to sit quietly beneath the tree and watch. Not judging, not reacting, just watching. And over time, the monkey grows tired. It sits beside you. The mind, once your master, becomes your companion. As we age, we are given a rare invitation, not to fight the voice, but to befriend it. Because in truth, that critic is often just a frightened part of ourselves. The child who was once scolded, the adult who was once overlooked, the soul who tried hard and didn't always succeed. To live fully in this chapter of life, we must not push those voices away, but hold them gently, like we would a trembling bird in our hands. So the next time you hear that voice, whether it whispers you're too old to try something new or too late to be needed, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, is this truth or just an old tape still playing? And more importantly, what would compassion say instead? Because beneath the noise of the critic is a quieter, kinder voice. The one that says, you've already walked so far, you've given so much. And now perhaps, it's time to receive the peace you once gave to others. Let this be the beginning, not of battle, but of understanding, not of proving, but of simply being, and being is enough. Part 2. Solitude in Nature. There's something profoundly humbling about standing alone beneath a vast sky, surrounded by trees older than memory and wind that doesn't need words. In a world that constantly talks, nature remains powerfully silent, yet within that silence, it speaks volumes. It tells truths we have long forgotten, not in sentences but in sensations, through the rustle of leaves, the slow unfolding of petals, the quiet dignity of still water. As we grow older, many of us begin to sense that the frantic pace of the world no longer suits the rhythm of our hearts. Crowds feel more overwhelming. Noise feels heavier. The desire to chase after everything begins to fade. What replaces it, often quietly at first, is a longing for simplicity, for a kind of sacred stillness that only solitude can offer. And where better to meet that stillness than in nature, where everything is exactly as it is, and nothing needs to be explained. There's a story I once heard from a Zen hermit who lived in the Japanese mountains for over 20 years. He described a moment during his first winter alone. The snow had blanketed everything in sight, and not a single footprint had disturbed its surface. At first, the silence felt oppressive, even frightening. But then he noticed something, how his breath made little clouds in the freezing air, how the trees stood still without apology, how the sun made each snowflake sparkle like a jewel. In that moment, he said, I realized that the world was not silent at all. It was simply speaking in a language I had forgotten how to hear. Solitude in nature has this ability to slow us down, not just externally, but internally. It doesn't just change our schedule, it changes our perception. We begin to notice small things again. The way ants carry burdens many times their size. The way a bird sings not to be heard, but because it must. The way a river flows without hurry and still arrives. In Buddhist philosophy, this attentiveness is a form of meditation. It's called bare awareness, being fully present with whatever is happening, without needing to name it, fix it, or judge it. And yet many people fear solitude. They mistake it for loneliness, but there is a quiet difference between the two. Loneliness is the feeling of lacking connection. Solitude, on the other hand, is the fullness of being connected to oneself, to the earth, to something greater than thought. Nature invites us into that kind of solitude, not to escape people, but to return to ourselves, to remember that we too are nature. Not separate, not observers, but participants in this living, breathing web of life. I once met a widower who had recently started walking alone in the woods behind his home every morning. He told me, "At first I just wanted to get out of the house. I felt too empty sitting still, but over time, those walks became something else. The trees didn't judge me. The birds didn't ask questions, they just let me be. And that was enough." He said those quiet walks helped him grieve, not by giving him answers, but by reminding him that life continues in its own way. Seasons change, leaves fall, and in time, new shoots grow. What a beautiful metaphor for our own healing. We don't always need to be fixed. We need to be allowed to be, gently, naturally, without rush. So if you find yourself longing for something but unsure what it is, perhaps it's not more activity you need, but more space. Space to breathe, to walk slowly, to notice what you've been too busy to see. Nature does not demand your productivity. It invites your presence. It says, "Come as you are, sit, breathe, be," and in that being, you might just remember what it means to live fully, not as a reaction, but as a response. Not to prove anything, but to feel everything. Not to control the world, but to belong to it again. Part 3. The beauty of a good sacrifice. There's a quiet nobility in giving something up, not out of lack, not from punishment, but from purpose. In a society that celebrates accumulation of things, experiences, even achievements, it can feel countercultural, almost rebellious, to let go. And yet, as we age, letting go becomes not just necessary, but profoundly liberating. Because in surrendering what no longer serves us, we make room for what truly nourishes the soul. Buddhism speaks of renunciation not as deprivation, but as clarity. To renounce doesn't mean to suffer, but to see clearly, to recognize which attachments bring suffering and which acts of letting go invite freedom. And in this season of life, after 60, when the body slows and the noise begins to thin, many of us stand at a powerful threshold. We can keep holding on, or we can start living more deliberately, more meaningfully. I once heard the story of a man who, after retiring from a demanding corporate career, gave away almost everything he owned. His house, his car, even his expensive watch collection, gone. When asked why, he said, "Because I realized I was maintaining a life I no longer wanted to live. I had spent decades acquiring things to feel accomplished, but what I really wanted was space. I didn't want a mansion. I wanted a morning breeze." He now lives in a small cabin near a lake, surrounded by trees and time. And in his eyes you could see it. Peace had finally found a place to sit down. There's something beautifully paradoxical about the idea that living fully might require having less, not more. But isn't that the truth of every garden? You must prune in order to bloom. You must cut back the branches, remove the weeds, let some things die in order for others to flourish. Sacrifice, when done with awareness, is not loss. It's a trade, a wise trade. We give up what is shallow to reach what is deep. We lay down the heavy armor of image and ambition to pick up the lightness of authenticity. In Buddhist teaching, this is often illustrated by the metaphor of the raft. Imagine you are crossing a wide river. You build a raft to carry you across. It serves you well. But once you reach the other shore, do you continue to carry the raft on your back? Of course not. And yet in life, we often cling to old identities, outdated routines, or burdensome roles long after they've served their purpose. The wisdom is in knowing when to set the raft down. For those of us in the later chapters of life, sacrifice looks different than it did in youth. It may not be about career moves or financial risks. It might be more subtle, more internal, choosing to forgive instead of holding resentment, choosing stillness over constant doing, choosing a quiet truth over a loud appearance. These too are sacrifices, and they are often the most powerful ones. I remember a grandmother who told me about how she chose to stop giving advice to her adult children unless they asked. It was hard, she said with a chuckle. I had to bite my tongue more times than I can count. But she added, what I gave up in control, I gained in closeness. They started calling more, not because they needed something, but because they wanted to share. That too is the beauty of a good sacrifice. It deepens relationships. It makes room for trust, presence, and genuine connection. Living fully, then, is not about stuffing our days with more. It's about savoring what's already there and clearing space for the sacred to rise. The sunsets you now have time to watch. The old friend you now have time to call. The breath you finally notice. These are the quiet riches that only become visible when we stop chasing and start choosing. So ask yourself gently, what have I been carrying that I no longer need? What am I willing to lay down, not as a defeat, but as an offering to the life I still want to live? Because there's a beauty in every good sacrifice. It says, I know what matters now, and I choose it fully. Part 4. Slowing down time. There's a peculiar thing that happens as we grow older. We begin to notice time, not as numbers on a clock, but as a feeling in the bones, a hush in the room, a memory that flickers and then fades. It moves differently now. It no longer sprints, as it once did in the urgency of youth. And yet, strangely, some days it seems to vanish altogether. Mornings melt into evenings. Seasons slip through our fingers. We find ourselves wondering, where did it all go? But what if the question isn't where time went? What if the question is, were we ever truly there when it came? So much of life is spent in movement. Not just physical movement, but mental thinking about the next thing while doing the current one, worrying about tomorrow while driving through today. We move fast, but we miss. We touch, but we don't feel. And in doing so, time seems to flee from us because we were never quite home in the moment it passed. In Buddhist thought, time is not an enemy nor a thief. It's a river. You cannot stop it. You cannot rewind it. But you can learn to stand in it fully naked, alive. And when you do, something beautiful happens. It stretches. One moment, lived deeply, can feel like eternity. A simple breath, taken with full awareness, can become an anchor in the vast sea of hours. I once knew an elderly man named Walter, who told me he had spent his entire working life waiting for retirement so he could finally enjoy life. But after retiring, he realized he didn't know how. I was always in a rush, he said, even when I had nowhere to go. It wasn't until his wife fell ill and he began caring for her, moment by moment, spoonful by spoonful, that he learned what presence really meant. I watched her eyes, he told me, not with urgency, but with devotion, and time slowed down in those moments. Everything else disappeared, and it was just us. Slowing down doesn't mean we lose momentum. It means we gain meaning. It allows us to catch details we'd otherwise miss: the warmth of the sun on our skin, the subtle creak of old wooden floors, the taste of tea sipped slowly instead of swallowed. These are not trivial things. They are sacred because they return us to now. And now is the only place where life ever truly happens. There's a Zen saying that goes, when walking, just walk. When eating, just eat. It sounds simple, but to practice it is to step into a different kind of time, not one ruled by pressure, but by presence. Part 5. A world in turning. The world feels different now, doesn't it? Not just because of age, but because of the times we're living in. There's a strange, unspoken tension in the air, something too vast to name but too near to ignore. You see it in the headlines, feel it in the weather, hear it in the unease of conversations. The old rhythms don't seem to hold anymore. The pace is frantic, the system's uncertain, the future no longer a far-off thought, but a very present urgency. It's as if we've arrived at a great turning point in history, one that none of us can opt out of. Some days this turning can feel overwhelming, like watching the tide rise and not knowing whether to swim or stand still. You might feel powerless in the face of it all. What can one person possibly do in a world unraveling? But perhaps the better question is, what kind of person will I choose to be in this unraveling? Buddhist wisdom reminds us that impermanence is not a curse. It's the natural condition of all things. Everything changes. Mountains erode, rivers shift. Even the stars burn out in time. What feels frightening is often just the truth we've been trying not to face. Nothing stays the same, but within that truth lies the seed of transformation. Because if things can fall apart, they can also be rebuilt. If a system collapses, a new one can rise. If a heart breaks, it can learn a gentler rhythm. I once sat with an environmental activist in his 60s who had spent his life trying to protect ancient forests. He had lost many battles, trees felled, habitats destroyed, but he told me something I'll never forget. "The work doesn't break me," he said. "What breaks me is when people stop believing they can still help. As long as we're alive, we're still a part of the answer." That stayed with me. Because sometimes the most radical thing we can do in troubled times is to stay open, not to retreat into numbness, not to collapse into cynicism, but to keep caring quietly, steadily, with whatever strength we have. And this is where your presence matters more than you know, especially now, because you've lived long enough to see cycles come and go. You've endured wars, recessions, losses, recoveries. You've learned how to be resilient, not from theory, but from experience. You carry a wisdom the world desperately needs right now, the wisdom of endurance, the wisdom of perspective, the wisdom of stillness amidst the storm. You may not be marching in protests or writing policy, but maybe you're planting a garden. Maybe you're reading to a grandchild about the importance of kindness. Maybe you're modeling what it looks like to live simply, mindfully, with fewer needs and deeper joys. These too are acts of resistance. These too are gifts offered to a world in flux. There's a saying, "It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness." And oh, how true that is in these days of uncertainty. Lighting a candle may not change the whole room, but it changes your corner. It creates warmth. It invites others in. And perhaps, if enough of us light our small flames, the darkness won't feel so absolute anymore. So don't underestimate the power of your presence. Don't think because you're older, you've stepped off the stage. Quite the opposite. You've simply stepped into a deeper role, one not of noise but of guidance, not of control but of steadiness. This world is turning, yes, but we are not helpless passengers. We are still, each of us, quiet stewards of what comes next. Let us not harden in fear. Let us soften in wisdom. Let us not cling to the past. Let us bless it, then walk forward. Let us not wait for others to act. Let us become the calm we crave, because even in a world on fire, a single act of compassion can become a refuge. Even now, especially now, we can choose to live fully by being fully here. Part 6. Listening to the voiceless. When was the last time you truly listened? Not to a person, not to a podcast, but to the world that exists quietly beyond our human noise. The gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, the soft tapping of rain on your window, the distant call of a bird at dusk. These sounds don't demand your attention, they invite it, and that's what makes them sacred. They belong to the world of the voiceless, a world we are deeply connected to, but so often forget to hear. In Buddhist tradition, compassion is not limited to humans. It extends to all sentient beings, to animals, trees, rivers, even the earth itself. Everything that lives carries a kind of sacred presence. But here's the truth we don't like to face. Nature cannot speak our language. It cannot raise its hand and ask for help. It cannot write letters or file complaints. Its cries are quieter, the disappearance of bees, the withering of forests, the silence where there once were birds. And yet when we listen, not just with our ears but with our hearts, we begin to hear it. The slow unraveling of ecosystems, the urgent stillness of a drying river, the aching hush of a once lush garden. These are not silent, they are pleading, and to hear them is to remember that we are not separate from the natural world. We are a part of it, and we depend on it for everything. If the insects disappear, the flowers don't bloom. If the trees fall, the oxygen thins. If the oceans warm, the winds change. And we who once thought ourselves rulers are simply guests. I once met a woman in her 70s who tended to a patch of land behind her modest home. It wasn't much, just a few herbs, some native grasses, and a small bird bath, but she treated it like a temple. Every morning she would sit beside it in silence. "I don't talk out loud anymore," she told me. "I just listen. The plants tell me when they're thirsty. The birds tell me when something's wrong. And the wind, it tells me everything." At first I thought she was speaking in metaphor, but as I sat with her and watched the way she noticed the smallest changes, the shift of light on a petal, the tremble of leaves before a storm, I realized she wasn't. She was practicing something we've forgotten in modern life: reverence. Listening, in this way, is a sacred act. It says, "I see you, I respect you. I understand that your life matters too." And this is not just poetic thinking. It's practical, essential truth. We cannot survive without the trees, without the bees, without the billions of tiny lives that quietly uphold our own. And yet, we continue to act as if we are alone at the center, as if our convenience matters more than their survival. But now, more than ever, we are being asked to wake up, to hear what we've ignored, to feel what we've numbed, to remember what we've lost sight of, that all life is interconnected. The air in your lungs was once held by a tree. The water in your glass once ran down a mountain. The food on your plate once pulsed with sunlight. You are not separate. You never have been. And so to live fully after 60, or at any age, is to live responsively, not with guilt, but with care, not with shame, but with awareness. It can begin simply planting wildflowers for the pollinators, reducing waste, choosing to walk instead of drive when possible. But even more deeply, it begins with listening, pausing in a forest, kneeling in a garden, watching the sky shift, and letting that be enough. Because when we listen to nature, we don't just hear it, we join it. We step out of our heads and into the vast breathing mystery of life. So take a moment, step outside, breathe in the morning air or the quiet of dusk, and ask yourself, gently, what is the world around me trying to say? It may not speak in words, but oh, how it speaks. Part 7. A new meaning of purpose. There's a quiet ache that can arise in later life, not physical but existential. It comes in moments of stillness, when the to-do lists are empty and the phone is quiet. You sit in your chair, perhaps near a window, and wonder, what am I meant to do now? What's my purpose if I'm no longer needed in the same ways I once was? It's a question many carry silently, especially after retirement, after the children have grown, after life has changed shape. And yet, beneath the ache of that question lies a beautiful opportunity to redefine purpose, not as performance, but as presence, not as the size of the stage, but the sincerity of the moment. We grow up in a culture that worships greatness. We're taught that to matter, our actions must be visible, measurable, impressive, and so we chase accolades, accomplishments, titles, applause. But Buddhist wisdom invites a different lens. It teaches us that meaning is not found in outcomes. It's found in intention, in mindfulness, in how we do what we do, no matter how small it may seem. I once heard a story about a man who cleaned the meditation halls of a monastery for nearly 30 years. He was never in front of the crowd, never gave a talk, never led a chant. Yet when he passed away, the monks wept. He held this space together, one of them said. His hands were always steady, and his heart was always present. His purpose wasn't in titles, it was in the care with which he moved, the peace he infused into every act. He was invisible to many, but essential to all. And so it is with many of us. Perhaps your purpose now is not in starting something new, but in deepening what's already here, in being a calm presence in a chaotic world, in showing up with wisdom in moments others would rush past, in holding space for silence, in truly listening to someone who just needs to be heard. Purpose does not need to be a grand declaration. Sometimes it's a quiet commitment, a vow to water your garden each morning as an act of gratitude, a decision to call someone every week who feels forgotten, a simple smile to a stranger that says, "I see you." These are not small things. These are sacred offerings. They shape the texture of life in ways we may never see, but that ripple nonetheless. I remember speaking with a woman who had spent her younger years raising 5 children. Now in her 70s, she felt adrift. "They don't need me anymore," she said softly. "I'm proud of them, but I feel invisible." I asked her what brought her quiet joy. She told me about knitting, about how she makes hats and scarves and leaves them anonymously in shelters. "They'll never know it was me," she smiled. "But I like to imagine someone feeling warm. That is purpose." In Buddhism, there's a deep reverence for the unseen, the temple cleaner, the tea pourer, the silent meditator. Each one holds the fabric of the whole. Purpose is not a spotlight. It is a lamp, quietly lit in a corner of the room. You don't always see where its light reaches, but it does reach, and it matters. So if you've been wondering what your purpose is now, pause. Don't search outward. Turn inward. What makes your heart soften? What brings peace to your hands? What are you uniquely able to offer? Not because you're trying to be important, but because it's simply true for you. Your life is already filled with quiet purposes, the stories you carry, the lessons you've learned, the kindness you offer without condition. These are not leftovers from your earlier years, they are the harvest. And now, you can offer them freely. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You simply need to be, with presence, with care, and with the deep knowing that your being is enough. Because purpose isn't always loud, sometimes it's simply love in motion. Part 8. The Hero Within. We often imagine heroes as larger-than-life figures, those who charge into danger, who win great battles, who leave behind legends in their wake. But what if we've misunderstood the word entirely? What if heroism isn't found in the spotlight, but in the quiet endurance of everyday life? What if the most heroic thing any of us can do is to keep showing up, softly, humbly, and wholeheartedly, especially when no one is watching? As we grow older, the world's gaze often shifts away, the accolades slow down, the responsibilities change shape, But that doesn't mean your strength fades. It simply takes on a quieter form. In Buddhist teachings, there is an archetype known as the Bodhisattva, a being who, out of deep compassion, forgoes their own escape from suffering in order to stay and help others awaken. The Bodhisattva isn't seeking fame or reward. They move through the world gently, offering their presence like a candle in the dark. And in many ways, I believe elders embody this spirit more than they know. I once met an older man, Henry, in his 80s, who spent every Thursday afternoon at a local hospital. He wasn't a doctor or a therapist. He simply sat with people, held their hands, listened to their stories. People think you need special training to comfort someone, he told me. But all you really need is to care. That's it. And the courage to sit with them when things get hard. When I asked if he ever felt like what he did mattered, he paused, then said, "I don't know if it matters to the world, but it matters to them. And that's enough for me." That to me is heroism, not in the grand gesture, but in the faithful presence. The act of staying kind, even when the world feels bitter. The decision to remain soft in a life that has tried to harden you. The strength to get up each day and offer love, even when your own heart is weary. Too often, our culture tells us that the heroic belongs to the young, to the bold, to the visible. But the truth is, it takes a different kind of bravery to grow old with grace, to face the aches and limitations of the body with acceptance, to navigate loss after loss without closing your heart, to keep choosing tenderness even when you've been bruised by time. In your life, you've faced battles no one may know about. You've held tears back in public and cried in private. You've sacrificed, forgiven, waited, endured. These are not signs of weakness. They are evidence of a soul that has walked through fire and still chooses to open its hands instead of closing its fists. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, "The light that burns twice as bright burns half as long." But what if the true light isn't the brightest, but the one that stays steady, the one that flickers patiently in the storm, refusing to go out? That's you. That's the light of quiet strength, of quiet love, of quiet courage. Maybe you're not climbing mountains or building empires anymore, but maybe you're doing something braver, like calling your estranged brother after years of silence, like letting go of a long-held resentment, like laughing through your grief, or holding your partner's hand even when words fail. These too are acts of heroism. And in truth, the world needs this kind of hero more than ever. Not the ones who shout the loudest, but the ones who listen the deepest. Not those who conquer, but those who connect. Not the flawless, but the faithful. So take a moment to honor the hero in you, not because you've done everything perfectly, but because you've kept going. You've kept loving. You've kept showing up with your whole heart, again and again. And if that's not heroic, I don't know what is. Part 9. Lighting candles, not cursing darkness. There's a certain kind of weariness that can settle in with age, not from the years themselves, but from having seen so much. You've witnessed the beauty of life, yes, but also its heartbreak, its injustices, its quiet cruelties. And after a while, it's easy to feel that maybe the world is simply too far gone, that maybe it's easier to retreat into resignation, to say, what difference can I make now? But this is where the quiet power of a single choice changes everything. There's an old saying, often attributed to Chinese wisdom, "It is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness." And what a radical, soul-stirring truth that is. It doesn't deny the existence of darkness. No, it faces it fully. But it also insists that despair is not the only option. It reminds us that even the smallest act of love, the softest word of kindness, the gentlest gesture of care, can become a flame. You don't need to solve the world's problems. You only need to bring light into your corner of it. I remember an elderly woman I once visited at a nursing home. She had lost her husband, her friends, most of her mobility, and nearly all of her independence. And yet when I entered her room, it was filled with warmth, not from sunlight, but from her presence. There were plants on her windowsill, handwritten cards on her dresser, and a soft smile on her face. She told me, "I try to make this room feel like a place someone would want to visit, even if they're just passing through." That was her candle. That was her way of saying, "I may not control what life takes from me, but I can choose what I give." That, my friend, is the quiet art of living fully. Living fully isn't about grand adventures or climbing peaks. It's about being present where you are and choosing again and again to meet the world not with bitterness, but with softness. Not because life has been perfect, but because you have become wise enough to see that love is still worth it. In Buddhist thought, the practice of right intention is part of the Eightfold Path. It's not about forcing happiness or pretending life is easy. It's about setting your heart to align with compassion, no matter the circumstance. It means waking each day and asking not what's wrong with the world, but rather, what can I bring to it today? A kind word, a steady breath, a smile to someone passing by, a patient silence in a tense moment. These are candles, and they are no less meaningful because they are quiet. What makes them powerful is that they are chosen. Every moment offers us this invitation to react or to respond, to harden or to soften, to curse the dark or to carry a light. And what's remarkable is this: when you choose to light a candle, you often end up illuminating the path for someone else, maybe even someone you'll never meet. That's the ripple of full living. It reaches beyond the self. So ask yourself, what's the candle you still hold? What's the light you've been waiting to share? It's not too late. It never was. Even now you can begin again. Even now your breath can be a prayer. Your day can be a devotion. Your life can be the gentle flame that reminds others hope is still possible, beauty still exists, peace is still within reach. And perhaps that's the deepest act of fullness, not to escape the dark, but to quietly refuse to let it win. You are not here to fade, you are here to shine. However softly, however briefly, but shine. You must, because the world is better when you do. So here we are, at the close of this quiet journey together, one that hasn't rushed, hasn't shouted, but has asked us to sit, to soften, and to see. And if there's one thread that has gently woven its way through every part of this reflection, it is this: to live fully after 60 is not to run faster, do more, or prove your worth again, but to return to what was always quietly calling your name: presence, peace, and purpose. We began with the voice inside, the inner critic that grows louder in solitude. But we learned to sit beside it, not in fear, but with compassion. We wandered into nature and let it remind us of our true pace. Unhurried, sacred, cyclical. We looked at sacrifice, not as loss, but as wisdom, trading the superficial for the soulful. We spoke of time and how it stretches beautifully when we are truly in it. We faced the world in turning and found that even in upheaval, we are not powerless. We listened to the voiceless, the trees, the bees, the rivers, and remembered we are part of all things. We explored a new meaning of purpose, quiet, tender, and no less important than grand ambition. We honored the hero within, each act of compassion, each moment of endurance, a story of courage. And finally, we came to the choice that waits in every breath. Will I curse the darkness or light my candle anyway? Dear friend, if you've carried a question in your heart about how to make this part of life meaningful, I hope you now know you already are. You do not need to earn another medal, chase another dream, or be anyone other than who you are. Right here, gently breathing, quietly awake. Let yourself walk gently through this world, not to escape its noise, but to hear its deeper song, to smile at a stranger, to bless the wind, to be present with your morning tea. These are not small things, these are the sacred rhythms of a full life. And so, I'll leave you with this question: what if the most beautiful chapter of your life has not been written yet, but is waiting patiently in the quiet choices you make each day? If this message touched something in you, if it reminded you of the strength, the softness, and the sacredness already within, then I invite you to walk with us again. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Here, we don't chase noise. We listen, we reflect, we walk quietly, but with meaning. Until we meet again, may your days be lit not by the glare of striving, but by the steady glow of quiet wisdom.